Okay, so are you feeling like the AI landscape is just moving at warp speed? Especially with Google right in the middle of it all.
Yeah, you're definitely not alone there. It's a lot to keep up with.
Totally. So today we're going to try and give you a shortcut through all that noise. We're doing a deep dive into a really insightful recent interview with Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai.
Right. Think of this as your kind of cheat sheet to understanding what really matters in Google's AI strategy coming straight from him.
Exactly. We've gone through the whole interview, and, to give you the full context, we've also got our usual briefing document, a study guide quizzes, essay questions, the works, and a timeline covering the key bits and people.
And our mission is pretty straightforward. Unpack Pichai's thinking on Google's long-standing AI first thing, how it's hitting search, what they think about the competition, and, their bigger vision for what's next.
And the goal for you listening is that you walk away with a really clear handle on Google's AI approach, their strengths, the challenges they're facing, where they see it all going, but without getting totally bogged down in jargon.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's dive in. Pichai kicks things off by really stressing that this AI-first strategy at Google, it's not some new reaction to all the buzz around generative AI lately.
That's a really key point he makes. He's quite clear that this has basically been Google's guiding principle since he became CEO way back in 2015.
In 2015, wow.
Yeah, so it wasn't a sudden pivot. It was like a core belief that AI was going to be the main engine for progress, especially for search.
Yeah.
And his take on the current AI scene is interesting too.
How so?
He doesn't see it as, a zero-sum game where if one company wins, everyone else loses. He actually frames it as an extraordinary opportunity, particularly for search, but also lots of other areas.
Which naturally brings up that whole innovator's dilemma idea, right?
Yeah.
The worry that jumping onto a new tech might wreck your main business.
Yeah.
But Chai seems to have a strong view on that.
He really does. He basically argues that dilemma only exists if you approach it that way mentally. Google's strategy, he says, is just lean into it as hard as you can.
Plain and hard.
Yeah. He even points to other big shifts, like the move to mobile or how YouTube tackled TikTok with Shorts, even when it wasn't immediately clear how they'd make money from it.
Right.
And his guiding principle through all this, follow the user. All else will follow.
That makes a lot of sense. Adapt to how people are actually
Right.
using the tech. So, okay, this AI-first approach they've had for years.
Yeah.
How's it actually changing Google Search, their biggest product? We're already seeing AI stuff in there, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Pichai really emphasizes that AI is fundamentally changing what search is. He points to things they've already rolled out, like transformers, BERT and MEM, which helps Google understand searches much better.
Right.
And then there are the AI overviews. These are apparently being used now by over 1.5 billion people.
1.5 billion.
Yeah, in over 150 countries. I mean, the scale is just enormous.
Wow. Okay, so what effect are these AI overviews having? Are people searching differently?
Well, one big thing is that people are asking more complex questions, longer questions. It's expanding the kind of queries people use search for. And looking ahead, they're actively testing a dedicated AI mode right inside search.
An AI mode. So like fully conversational.
Exactly. Powered by their top models, using search as a native tool within that conversation. It sounds like a pretty big shift.
Yeah, that does sound fundamental. Is there actual data showing users like these changes? Are they using search more because of AI?
Pichai says yes, quite clearly. Their data shows users are engaging more, using the product more with these AI features baked in. So it seems to be adding real value for people.
Okay, so Google's clearly all in on AI for search. But, you can't ignore the competition. It feels like every day there's a new AI company or model popping up.
It really does feel that way sometimes. And Pichai acknowledges it calls it a fiercely competitive moment. He specifically names the big players. OpenAI, obviously, with Sam Altman, xAI with Elon Musk, Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, Microsoft, Satya Nadella.
Right, the usual suspects.
Yeah. But what's interesting is his tone. He talks about competitors with respect, almost seeing them as pushing the whole field forward, which benefits everyone.
That's a maybe more collaborative view than you sometimes hear. So we see different strategies out there. Some are pushing standalone AI apps, right? Like ChatGPT or even Google's own Gemini. How does Google's broader strategy compare?
Well, Pichai makes the point that Google's approach is way broader than just one app. Yes, they have the Gemini app, but the bigger play is weaving AI into everything else.
Like search, YouTube.
Exactly. Search, YouTube, Google Cloud, their other products. He even suggests that search with AI overviews might actually be the most widely used generative AI product out there today.
Huh. That's an interesting way to frame it.
Yeah. And he seems really convinced that the overall AI market is just massive, much bigger than previous tech shifts. So there's room for lots of winners, even new companies we haven't seen yet. It's not necessarily winner take all.
A rising tide lifts all boats kind of idea.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Pichai talks about something he calls a perhaps underestimated advantage for Google, their infrastructure. What's he getting at there?
He's talking about their huge long-term investment, like over 20 years in the really foundational stuff, data centers, global network, and crucially, their own custom-designed chips.
Right.
He sees this as a major edge. It lets them operate on what he calls the Pareto frontier of performance and cost.
Okay, break that down. Pareto frontier.
Basically getting the absolute best performance out of their AI models while keeping the cost to run them as low as possible. Maximum bang for your buck, essentially.
Got it. And those custom chips, that's the TPUs, right? The tensor processing units we hear about.
Exactly those. They started developing them back in 2017, apparently. Now they're on the 7th generation codename Ironwood.
7th gen already.
Yeah. And these chips are specifically built for the heavy lifting of AI, training the models and then running them efficiently, what they call inference. This directly helps lower the cost for things like search queries.
So they use these TPUs mainly.
Primarily for their own big models like Gemini, yeah. But they're also flexible. They use NVIDIA GPUs too and offer both options to their cloud customers. It's a massive investment, though. Their planned capital expenditure for 2025, around $75 billion.
$75 billion.
Yep. And roughly half of the compute part of that spend is earmarked for Google Cloud.
That's just staggering investment. But scaling AI like this must bring some serious challenges, right? What hurdles does Pichai see?
He points to two really critical ones: generating enough electricity and having the skilled workforce needed. He actually suggests electricity might become the bigger bottleneck for AI progress and economic growth than, say, just building more chips.
Electricity?
Yeah.
Really? That's not usually the first thing you think of with software and AI.
It's the physical reality underneath it all. He calls it an execution challenge. We have the tech for more power, solar, nuclear, geothermal, etc., but we need massive upgrades to the grid, better transmission, and, crucially, faster ways to get permits for these projects.
So gridlock in the grid itself.
Sort of, yeah, and permits. Plus, he flags a potential workforce issue, just having enough skilled people, like electricians, to actually build and maintain all this new infrastructure.
Okay, so these aren't just tech problems. They're logistical policy problems, too. But he seems pretty optimistic they can be solved.
He does. He expresses confidence, particularly in the U.S., in finding capitalist solutions, basically, that focus and investment will flow to solve these problems. He thinks innovation will keep driving energy breakthroughs, and the workforce issues can be managed with planning.
Okay. Now, looking beyond the immediate AI race, Google's always had these big, long-term bets, their moonshots. Pichai mentioned some of those, right? Quantum computing, robotics.
Yes, he talks about these as patient investments, foundational R&D for the long haul. For quantum computing, he makes an interesting comparison.
Oh, yeah.
He says it's maybe where AI was back around 2015. He predicts we'll see a really useful practical computation, something showing a clear advantage over classic computers in maybe the next 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years. That feels closer than I thought.
And importantly, the plan is to make that accessible via the cloud. So you wouldn't need your own quantum computer.
Okay. And what about robotics? That feels a bit more grounded.
Yeah, on robotics, he says their R&D teams are working on some really advanced models combining vision, language understanding, and physical actions. He admits maybe they were too early trying to apply robotics before. But now, with current AI advances, he sees this as the next sweet spot where AI and robotics really come together effectively. He even hints at potential future products.
Ooh, like what?
Doesn't say specifically, but he floats this really interesting idea of Google potentially playing a role like the Android for robotics.
Like a standard operating system for robots. Wow.
Yeah, a foundational platform. It's quite a vision.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, running a company like Alphabet, especially through all this change, must require a certain kind of culture, a certain leadership style. How does Pichai talk about that?
He emphasizes that Google's culture was, intentionally built for innovation, investing in employees, empowering them. He mentions the famous perks, the 20% time for side projects.
Right, the classic Google stuff.
Yeah, but he also acknowledges challenges like how COVID impacted things and the need now to reemphasize the mission and why in-person interaction matters. That's behind their 3 days in the office model and designing specific physical spaces for collaboration.
And is he actively trying to shape that culture now? Foster more intensity, maybe?
Seems like it. He talks about fostering intensity, passion, and focusing on execution. He even mentioned trying to recreate smaller, agile labs within the bigger company structure.
Trying to get that startup energy back.
Something like that. He also points out they're still attracting top talent, PhDs, and mentions that kind of virtuous cycle with ex-Googlers starting companies, sometimes coming back or getting acquired. And he thinks AI itself could help democratize talent globally.
Interesting. Now, Alphabet isn't just Google, right? There are all the other bets. How does Pichai see the point of Alphabet as a whole beyond just being a holding company?
He really pushes back on the idea that it's just a holding company allocating money. He sees the structure as flowing from their core approach, using fundamental tech and R&D to solve big problems in unique ways.
So AI connects them.
Exactly. He calls AI a unifying layer across search, YouTube, cloud, but also Waymo, isomorphic with AlphaFold, robotics, all these different bets. He doesn't rule out future spin-offs or IPOs for some of them, but the core engine is that central innovation.
Got it. Finally, he's been CEO of Google, now Alphabet, for almost a decade. Did he offer any personal reflections on that time?
He did a little. He said he's most proud of Google's ability to really push the frontiers of technology, do fundamental R&D. He mentioned Nobel Prizes coming out of their work, and then turn that science into actual value, into businesses.
That makes sense. Any regrets?
He mentioned, sort of in passing, a few small regrets about acquisition opportunities they looked at hard but didn't end up doing, and he actually named one, Netflix.
Wow, Netflix. Imagine that alternate history. Okay, so as we wrap this up, what are the absolute key things to take away from Pichai's view of Google's AI future?
I think the big ones are, first, this deep, long-term commitment to AI. It's not new, it's foundational. Second, how they're actively evolving search because of AI, not despite it. Third, the massive, maybe overlooked advantage of their infrastructure, the chips, the data centers.
Right.
Fourth, the real-world scaling challenges, especially electricity and workforce, but his optimism about solving them. And fifth, that long-term vision stretching into things like quantum and robotics.
And the overall vibe you get is confidence. Like they feel they can not just cope, but it can actually lead through this.
Absolutely. There's a strong sense of conviction there, confidence in their strategy, their tech, their people, and their ability to execute on this AI-first future.
Okay, so here's something for you, our listener, to chew on. Given Google's huge investments, their massive scale, and this very long-term view Pichai laid out, what part of their whole AI strategy do you find most promising? Or maybe, what part feels most concerning for where tech and society might be heading?
Yeah, thinking about that balance, the amazing innovation potential, but also the huge infrastructure demands, and just how our relationship with computers keeps changing.
It is a lot to think about. We really hope this deep dive has helped you get a clearer picture of how one of the world's biggest tech companies is navigating and shaping the future.